opportunity to be here today and hope I can present. You need me louder? Yes. Now, please let me know in the back. Okay, does this work? Does that sound better? You can take one baby step forward. Well, I wouldn't want to eat it. Okay, so, you give us some fire. Yes, that's really good. Can you hear me now? Yes. Awesome, thank you. So, it really, Judy Otto was such a contributor to community. It's an honor to be part of this process and this opportunity to be with you today. And when I asked what I was to talk about, he said your life. So here goes. I'm going to start with just basically the foundations. I was raised in a western Michigan, very small town called Casanova. It had 312 people. It still has 4 corners and a flashing yellow light. And that was where my father was an apple grower, and when I was about 9 years old, he bought a cherry farm in Oceana County, which is near Silver Lake up in north of Muskegon. So we summered in Muskegon and went to school and wintered in Kent County and just northwest of Grand Rapids. And I think, looking back at my childhood, I was the oldest of 4 children, and I never went to kindergarten because I had a younger sick brother, and my parents were concerned that I would bring home appropriately illnesses to him that would be dangerous. So my mother was an elementary school teacher, and I was well prepared for first grade. I can even show you, and we'll have all this, my memorabilia and the parlor later, but I was reading books at pretty early that. So after school in the elementary days, we went home, and you put on your work clothes and you went out in the orchard and you picked up apples and put them in crates and they went to Gerber's for applesauce. Those days were over. You wouldn't want to eat that applesauce the way it looked for apples that we put in those crates. But in the summer we picked cherries, and you were taught to do things harder and longer. You didn't pick cherries with one hand. You had to pick cherries with 2 hands so you got more in the bucket. Okay? And my mother was a perfectionist. If in a 4-H project there was a error down, 4 inches, you tore off those 4 inches and you started over with your knitting project. And high school was in a small but very reputable high school, and I gradually went to Michigan State University. I was part of the honors college, and so I didn't have to do credits. I didn't have to do a major. I had more credits in German than I did in chemistry and the biologic sciences, although I was pre-med. And the reason I think I really liked my German was that there was Herr Professor Steinmetz liked music, and every class started with him, with us singing a song in German. So I learned lots of German songs. I reached Michigan State pretty well, except for organic chemistry. No one told me that organic chemistry isn't chemistry. Organic chemistry you learn differently, and that was a real problem. And I had to ultimately take a summer and go back and catch better grades in my organic chemistry. When I went to my first interview for medical school at the University of Michigan, they said, "What happened to you in organic chemistry?" But I made it and was accepted to the University of Michigan Medical School. And that was interesting because there were 10% of our class was women. And the faculty couldn't imagine how they were going to handle 10% of that class being female. That was just unheard of. Now our classes, of course, are over 50% women, always. But probably too is where the enforced, and probably why I'm having trouble recovering today. I'm not sure. That's a possibility. Anyway, so additionally, from a female perspective, I was the third woman on the faculty of Meridian High School for Children, and I was the 25th physician. I checked yesterday, and there are now 450 faculty at Meridian Hospital, 615 if you include the specialists. So that is a significant change, and that amount of time. The female perspective also has never gone completely away, although it's changed a lot. Even when I was an appropriate candidate for election for the board of directors of the American Academy of Pediatrics, that was typically you worked your way up. It was sort of acknowledged that you were the best qualified covering Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Ontario. That was our district. But not for my election. There was both times that there's 2 3-year terms, and both times it was a contested election with once a man from Michigan and once a man from Ohio. And fortunately, I won both elections. But I had to work harder because I had to get the vote out. People just don't bother to vote, like we know everywhere. And I really worked to get that vote out so that I was able to serve my 2 terms as on the board of directors and the AAP. Well, that's sort of my education, but we then went to internship at Northwestern University, and the first day of internship, this young doctor from Johns Hopkins sat next to me, and he talked to me the whole morning, and that was Dr. Scott Owens. And the rest is history. That's how we met. And yesterday morning, he said to me, "Morning, you're my wife, the joy of my life." And that's truly the case for me as well. We have, all along the way, we've shared every step. We have now been, we were married in 1971. We celebrated our 54th wedding anniversary this summer. And he has been actually a major, she supported and tolerated all my passions and my endeavors. So join me in thanking Scott. In 1976, we finished our training in Boston. He did his came home from Vietnam. He had been in Vietnam right out of internship, came back from Vietnam, and we moved to Boston where he did his residency in subspecialty in training in infectious disease, and I did a fellowship in birth defects and genetic counseling. And we moved to Indianapolis in 1976 with a 10-week-old baby, Beth. And 2.5 years later, we had Judy. And then in early adolescence, Jason Bull, my nephew, joined us for high school and college. And many of you will remember Jason. They're all those years of being 13, 14, and 15, 14, 15, and 16. Those were challenging years for us. And it's really where I think I learned that life is not balanced. You juggle. It's constantly a juggle. But they're all participated a lot in youth group in Meridian Street, and they, Beth is now, they're all gainfully employed and independent adults. Beth is a librarian at the Chicago Public Library in special collections. Jason is and his wife with their 10-year-old son Thatcher live in Denver. Julia is a music involved, but I remember being giving a talk. I think this is my second talk. And first talk was many years ago in the mid-'80s when we had a series called Faith at Work. And that was a challenge for me. I was asked to talk, and I don't know if anyone here was involved at that time, but I remember one of the things, I think that's the first time I really talked about inclusion of children with disabilities. And the book, oh, now I'm blocking the name, sorry. But it included the song, All God's Children Got a Place in the Choir. Some sing lower and some sing higher. Some sing out over the telephone wire, and some just clap their hands. And that is really, really reminiscent of my talk on Faith at Work at Meridian Street. It's the year was the book that first was mentioned. However, not all of these times up to here were particularly easy. As a young adult, really young adolescent, I always had a thought, deep thought, that either I was going to die young or I would die very old. Well, obviously I'm over 80, so it's the latter. But there were some interesting times along the way. And in my first year of college, after my first year of college at Michigan State, I said I didn't want to just hand out tickets to our cherry pickers, and I wanted to do something else. So my parents let me make cherry pies on the breakfast table and sell them to the tourists that we come by the market. And this one gentleman, I'm going to tell you this whole story, but this gentleman would come by like 3 days in a row. And he always would buy some small portion of something, never a pie. He just bought something little that I might have had left over. And the fourth day he came, he wanted a bushel of apples. I thought, well, that's strange. We're going from a small pie here. Okay. So he, I said, well, fine. And I'm sorry, I don't have a good box for you to put them in. Oh, just put them in the trunk. I said, no, you can't put, these are my dad's really good apples. We're not going to get them bruised. I don't want you to get them bruised in the trunk. Oh, okay. Well, then just put them in the back seat. Okay? So I had, at that moment, a very immediate vision of Hansel and Gretel. Do you remember the story where the witch wanted her to lean over the oven to see if it was hot enough to cook? That went through my mind. And that was heaven sent and absolutely confident. And I backed up and I said, no, would you do it? Tried to hand him the bushel of apples, and he dropped the bushel, grabbed me, and this is the story from the newspaper. I'll try to read it for you. It spells it best. Benny is being held in without bond in the Oceana County Jail following his plea of guilty to a charge of assault and intent to commit rape before the circuit judge. The Ludington man was arrested Sunday and is undergoing intensive questioning by Oceana officers and state police. According to the sheriff, he admitted to putting a knife on a 19-year-old Silver Lake area girl last Saturday afternoon and attempting to force her into his car. In an ensuing struggle, the girl broke away and the Ludington man fled when another car was seen coming down the road. The girl, though badly frightened, managed to obtain the license number, as I I crawled up out of the dirt. I memorized his license plate number, and I know the police went to his home. His wife was there, and she said she hadn't seen him in a month. And so the next day, he did arrive at home, and his wife turned him in, and the police went to that. The sheriff reported that he had admitted 5 other criminal attacks in various parts of the state. I later learned at least 1 murder in Iowa, and that he was being held for a pre-sentencing investigation in the jail while the investigation continues. So the rest of the story is that I did memorize that license plate number. He was arrested. They brought him by for me to identify, and I said, yeah, that's the guy. I had seen him several times. And that was one of my very first scary stories. But then again, in my second year of pediatric residency at Northwestern, the modus operandi was 24 on, 24 off in the emergency room. That's what you did. And I woke up with the very worst headache of my life. And I called in and said, I'm sorry, I just can't come. Well, my friends in the emergency room said, that's not normal. She comes to work no matter what. This is bad. I didn't answer the phone when they called, so they got security, and they went out to, broke into my apartment and found me unresponsive on the bathroom floor. And they say I said to them, well, they'll probably want to do a spinal tap. That's what I'm told, but I don't remember the next 5 days at all. And indeed, I had meningococcal meningitis that I caught from holding a child for another physician's patient, just to help them do the spinal tap on that child. So it was a disease you die from, and you still do if you aren't treated. When the AAP, not the CDC, when the AAP tells you to get a vaccine, now we have that, and in those days there was no meningococcal vaccine. So it was a very scary time for my family, but I was one of the fortunate ones, and Scott was in Vietnam. We were friends, but not married, and he was in Vietnam at the time. And so my parents came and stayed with me in Chicago, and I've always been interested in the origin of hymns, and sometimes I share those stories with people, but when I was very young, a friend of the family told me the story about Ethel Waters and his eyes on the sparrow. Do you know that story? Song? And Ethel Waters, in fact, I have here an out-of-print version of her autobiography, His Eye is on the Sparrow. So my parents, a friend had told me about Ethel Waters and why she was actually performing, and a beam on the stage, over the stage, fell just inches from her. And she burst into the song, His Eye is on the Sparrow, I know he watches me, and then it ultimately became the title of her autobiography. But when, it's always been a favorite of our family, but that week when I was sick in the hospital, my parents, it was their wedding anniversary and it was getting better, so my dad took my mom to a play. It was called Member of the Wedding. Have any of you are familiar with Member of the Wedding? It's a movie, yes, and they came back to tell me that in that story, the stage version at least, the child had meningitis, and they sang His Eyes on the Sparrow in that movie. So he keeps, goes around, keeps coming around. It's not in our hymnal, it's in the black ones, in the chancel. I said I wanted you all to sing it with me, but Mark said I should sing it, and I'm not quite up to that this week. So, and there's one other episode that maybe I just kind of feel was like experience-wise. On Christmas Day in 1973, Scott and I were flying back from spending Christmas with my family in Michigan to where we were doing residency in Boston. And mid-flight, the plane suddenly tipped sideways halfway, dropped 10,000 feet. It seemed like an hour, it was probably less than a minute, but everything flew. The stewardess went through the ceiling, there were wires hanging down, the metal carts, beverage carts were bent. I was sitting ahead with somebody's book, but the yaw control went out. We were sure this was it. And when you're flying sideways 10,000 feet, very fortunately, pilot got things back under manual control. We landed in Boston. We've got ambulances all around. They didn't know what was going to happen. The runway was all foamed, and we were fine. But that was another very, very terrifying experience that had pretty close consequences. So, back to career. I've been at Riley now for 49 years. We came to Indiana University in 1976. As of October 1st, I worked as a practicing physician at Riley Hospital for Children. And I just want to tell you how supportive Riley has been of everything I thought I wanted to do. I always cared for children with disabilities. Even as early as 1978, and I brought this, it says, you can look at these all later, but Riley Clinic keeps up with high-risk babies, and I brought it because our own Carol Elrod wrote that article for the Indianapolis Star way back then. I had several passions. Specifically, obviously, child passenger safety. I got involved with car seats, and some people want to know, always ask, what's a geneticist and a developmental pediatrician working with car seats? Where's the connection? In my first 3 years, taking care of those babies out of our intensive care unit at Riley, we had 1 death and 2 permanently brain damaged babies. Not because of the complications of the prematurity that they had experienced, but because we hadn't gotten them in a $45 car seat. And so, I'm not going to go into all the details, but I did establish the first car seat loan program for Riley at that time, and then I was actually approached by 2 state legislators. Would I help them do a car seat law? Well, sure, I guess that's what I was supposed to do. So the whole story of legislation came, and we worked through the early 1980s to get the first car seat laws in Indiana. And then, but early I took care of children with disabilities, and it became clear to me that the children that I was taking care of didn't even fit in the car seats we had. Those very small preemies didn't fit in the car seats. You had a cast because you had a hip dislocation, you couldn't sit up. What were we supposed to do? I could tell you horror stories about what parents did, but I became very involved in developing resources called Safe Travel for All Children. We teach what's called the STAC course, Safe Travel for All Children. And we became the National Center for Safe Transportation of Children with Special Health Care Needs. And the country, I just had a call last week from Iceland. Would I please come and talk to their directors and tell them how important it was? I don't know how that's going to turn out, but we'll see. So there was child passenger safety, there was Down syndrome, in which I had a lot of experience in training in Boston with, and they had established the Down syndrome program, and then gun violence prevention. And I could spend an hour talking about each of those entities, but won't. And all that work really led to honors. So in 1993, Riley Children's Children's Foundation granted me the Morris Green Professor of Pediatrics. I still carry that title today, Emeritus stature. And it was the first really fully funded endowed professorship at Maryland. So, and that was a huge honor for me to have had that. And I don't know why, but this came up yesterday when I was reading through all these things. And I thought I'd just read this to you. This is 12/7/93, and this is a note. Look at the lovely eagle on the cover, sent to me by a colleague at Meridian who said, "One of my favorite verses from the Bible, it seems appropriate today. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk, parenthesis, or in your case, continue to run, in parenthesis, and not faint," from Isaiah. Congratulations on truly one of the achievements of a lifetime. We're proud of you. That's what, and you know, when you write a note like that, that's so meaningful for, I've saved it all these years and just, it must be right that I just had to cross over it yesterday. And then in 2021, the Senior Society of IUPUI actually gave me the Gerald F. Coe Community Engagement Award, and you can see that back here where you see that. And then in 2022, Brian Jonas Foundation gave me the Champion for Children Award, which those of you who've been to our dining in the home are like how a big wild wagon. It's very big, not very limited. So, there have been many fantastic experiences. It's like, okay, we're going to make this. I was very privileged to serve the American Academy of Pediatrics as chair of the Committee on Injury, Violence, and Prevention. They pulled me into that role with publications and work we had done with safe transportation. And as part of that, one of my responsibilities was to speak at a press conference at the White House in the West Wing. And I was along with Ann Brown, who was the chair of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and Hillary Clinton from the White House, who worked in children's events. And you can see my picture with Hillary here, and that was a very fun, that wasn't the only time I met with Hillary, but if we have time later on, I'll share a couple of my other experiences, one of my other experiences with Hillary at the Academy. I served for 25 years on the National Child Passenger Safety Board representing the AAP, and I've been able to teach in nearly every state, Hawaii to Alaska, and I can't recollect anything in ever speaking in South Dakota, so I can't say all the states. I don't think I've been to South Dakota. But Alaska was privileged to be asked by their state transportation people 5 times. Scott and I got to go to Alaska. They wanted to come in November, and I said, how about July? And so we went in July, and 2 of those trips we were able to combine with mission trips from Meridian Street, so they went back to back. So we spent 1 week teaching and a week on Meridian Street mission trips. And I brought along a poster that hangs in my office. Yes, child, I love you, buckled up. It's from, it's signed print from Barbara Laval, who illustrated several books. One of them, and the books are children's books. Mama, Do You Love Me? Have you ever seen that book? And I tried to find it, it must be at the White House. Anyway, it is a great story. And she did that for the state of Alaska, and they presented me with that poster. They also gave me these little moccasins with thanks from the children of Alaska. So those are very fun things that I keep in my office. I also was privileged to speak at the Middle East Neonatal Conference in Doha, representing the American Academy of Pediatrics, and that had a very poignant moment that I wanted to share. So, my assigned topic was epigenetics. Now, yes, I'm a geneticist, but I'm much more a pediatrician, but I was the geneticist at the Academy, and they asked me to talk on epigenetics in Doha. And what is that? Well, very simply, epigenetics are changes in the gene expression that don't alter the DNA. So it is effects from diet, starvation, environmental factors that affect the expression of genes, but it doesn't change your DNA sequence. So it's a bit of a tough topic to talk about, but I took it on and I went. And in the lunch line after the talk, I thought, how is this going over? And this woman came up and spoke to me. She was a pediatrician from Turkey. And she said, I just want to thank you. She said, I couldn't understand how this had any meaning for me, epigenetics, but you made it clear. And I thought that made the whole trip to go out worth my time. I also gave a keynote address at the East African Pediatrics Society that met in Eldoret, and I was talking to them about the role of pediatricians in advocacy, which was a much easier topic for me. But I think the most memorable part of that experience was not the certificate they bring me afterwards, but the performers from, I'm assuming they were from Kenya, but they just crowded around me and presented me with a hand-woven, beautiful woven bracelet that they had made and worn, and you just remember those kinds of things as really fun. One of the other great experiences that Scott and I had was that I was invited to speak at the Showroom Palace in Vienna, and I told you we've been in 20 countries, but these are the pieces of ones that I remember. And it recently came to mind when that event, because at that event, we met and had dinner with Jane Goodall. And when she came on the cover of a magazine, what I remember about that event was meeting her, obviously, and that there were more forks on those tables than I had any idea what to do with. I have many more stories. So I don't know how far to go, but maybe one more, and that is that we were at our 50th medical school reunion in the big house in Ann Arbor a few years ago, and taking our seats, and I heard, Dr. Bull! And a little about 7 or 8 rows down in front of us was a pediatrician way. He worked her way up to my house. She must have seen my name tag, I'm not sure. We had never met. And she reminded me, or explained to me, that she had called me and that I had helped her set, she was at that time in the Army, and on an Army base, and needed a car seat program. And that I had helped her guide her in setting up a car seat program at her Army base in California. Another Dr. Bull story was we were in Milan, and I think it was one of the journeys of Paul, but we were touring around Milan, and Scott and I noticed this, the bus was abandoned alone, ready to go. And so, but we saw this commotion like a half a block away. It was went over and explored. There was a car, there was a car seat. It was kind of like camera action. They were doing a video first when they were born at Methodist because they couldn't be separated at the abdomen. I took them a car bed that we were able to fit them in so they could be safely transported. So I was involved in that part of the care and then their follow-up care as well. And so they say, when we look at, this is what the parents gave me, when we look into the faces of Amanda and Lindsay, our hearts well up with thankfulness for the special touch of love you had in our lives. And then they say, I thank my God in every remembrance of you from Philippians 1:3. So a very, very nice remembrance. And I have another one here. So I got this. This has been on my office door for years. We'll come back. We had a catastrophe in our office, and the next morning, this appeared on my door, and it says, I don't believe in miracles, I depend on them. And that same theme has recurred several times in my career. This is a little wooden thing that a mother gave me, an adopted mother, and it says, miracles do happen. And she adopted this child, and the story goes back further because he was failing to thrive and neglected, and I went to the courthouse. Pretty intimidating experience for this big courthouse, all of these lawyers supporting the family, and said, we can't, I managed to get them to acknowledge that this child needed to be removed from the home. He was adopted. 10 years later, I got a letter from the boy. His foster mom, adopted mom, had him write me this letter because he was an Eagle Scout. And he said, my mother tells me this is because you went back for him. So these are just a couple of examples of things that are so meaningful and keep you going when times are tough and when things are hard. I think there are some full circle experiences too. Very early in my career, I was giving my first plenary address at the American Academy of Pediatrics, and that's pretty inundated. That's very, very overwhelming. 3,000 people, and you're talking to this crowd. But seated next to me was C. Everett Koop, who was Surgeon General, with all of his bars and all of his, his uniform. And I had to follow him after that. So that was a remembering. I mean, that's a memorable experience. But many years later, I told that story when I was given Safe Kids Worldwide, gave me their Trailblazer Award a few years ago, and it's the C. Everett Koop Trailblazer Award. So it all came around to a circle, so I shared that story with them as well. Interesting phone calls. So when your staff member comes back and says, the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine is on the phone, do you want to talk to them? She's laughing, she knows. You talk to the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. And they wanted me to write an article, a review article on Down syndrome, which took 2 years, and I did it, and that was important. It also led actually to, along with writing the health supervision guidance for Down syndrome for 2 iterations, to the, what do they call it, the Distinguished Service Award from Down Syndrome Medical Interest Group. So the National Down Syndrome Doctors gave me that award. They didn't give that every year, for sure, and I was very privileged to get that. But it was from the New England Journal of Medicine. And then I came back from a clinic one day, and my administrative staff said, I don't know about this. This guy called, he says he's from the White House, safety administration, and I got to give my 2 cents of what gaps in pediatric transportation were, and it was very, very good. He says I have 2 or 3 minutes. So another interesting phone call was from a distinguished emergency room physician from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And we worked together in injury for some time, and he called and he said, "Marilyn, is this you?" And I said, "What?" Well, he had been doing a literature search, and this had come up on his search. And it's above the fold, front page, Muskegon Chronicle, back to baking at Cherry Point. And so it came up in his literature search. And really, is that you? So it was 50 years of cherry pies at Cherry Point, and the local community was sharing that. So I want to leave you with just a few thoughts. This life journey can be very interesting. You know, we're told you should set goals and follow them, and then you know where you're going. And that never happened to me. I always just went where it seemed to be right and did what it seemed to be the appropriate thing to do at the time. And it was hopefully right for my family, my children, and the world in which we live. And I always worked, never did anything on my own. It's always been as a member of a team. And there are several quotes from one of my personal heroes that I'd like to share with you. Marilyn Bull was the founder and the president of the Children's Defense Fund. And these are some things that really touch me, and I hope maybe you can take away too. Service is the rent we pay for living. It's the very purpose of life, and not something you do in your spare time. If you don't like the way the world is, you change it. You have an obligation to change it. You just do it one step at a time. If we don't stand up for children, we don't stand up for much. And she says, "I'm doing what I think I was put on the earth to do. I'm really grateful to have something that I'm passionate about and that I think is profoundly important." And I could echo that. And then there's my friend, Winnie the Pooh. He says, the price of any, Winnie the Pooh says, "You can't stay in your corner of the forest waiting for others to come to you. You have to go to them sometimes." And he also says, some people care too much. I think it's called love. Henry David Thoreau says, "The price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it." So I'm extremely grateful to all of those who have mentored me and that have supported me, my family that's tolerated me, and I think that we can go forward by remembering the tremendous guidance from Michael, which Rachel has focused her recent sermons on, and which greets us as we enter the Welcome Center. What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Thank you. So